again, just explaining a little bit about samples, and then we'll get into creating samples and then actually using them or accessing how we access samples. All right. Our idea of samples is very simple. It's basically just a slice of data from a question or from shared questions in Ascribe. Okay. I will be, and just one more thing, I'm going to be using Chrome today. So as I navigate, you'll see that I am actually in Chrome. And I'm going to navigate directly over here to Supervisor Studies. And right-click on my study and choose Questions. So again, first I'm going to create a sample. And I'll start out creating a sample on Q7. And to create a sample, there's two ways to create samples, from the questions page or from data that you display in Ascribe Coder. So we'll start out from the questions page. So I'm going to right-click on Q7 and navigate down to Samples, create a quick sample. Notice that there's two options here, create a quick sample or view. The view would take you to the samples page that we're going to discuss and show you any samples that were created for this particular question. So let me go ahead and create a quick sample. So this is our new sample dialog, or our create a quick sample dialog box. Again, samples should have an ID, or I should say samples should have an ID, identifier. How are you going to know, what this sample is? So I might just say this is my Q7 quality check, or whatever. Or you could just say Q7 QC if you have, and put your name in it, whatever. You can give your sample a description. Laura's webinar sample. All right. And notice down here that we get a list, and in this list right now there's just one question because this question is not shared, but I get a list of questions that share this code book, the Q7 code book. In this case, there's no shares, but and I'll choose, and I'll show you this from across shared code books in a second. All right, so I get a list of my questions that I'd like to take the sample from, and then I get some options. Do I want to randomly select some number of responses? Do I want to randomly select some percentage of responses? What do I want the coding status of those selected responses to be? Do I want coded only? Do I want quality, do I want these to be reviewed only or not quality reviewed only? So I've got 41 coded here, and maybe I want to check just those 41 in a sample, and I want to take a snapshot of it as it is today, so I just want to create this sample of those 41 responses. So I can actually tell it, hey, I want 100% of the coded only, and hit OK. So my sample has now been created. All right. I can actually access that sample a couple of ways, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. I want to create another sample here from shared code books just to kind of show you how that works. So again, to create a sample, right-click, Samples, create a quick sample, and notice that here I've got a list of questions that share this code book. Okay? And maybe what I need to do here, maybe I need to create a code book from some percentage of these samples. Maybe my direction has been create codes from a 25%, 25% of the responses here. So I'll randomly select, maybe it's 22%, 22%. And coding status doesn't matter, quality reviewed status doesn't matter. I'm going to call this my Q11 code creation sample. And you can, again, you might, code creation, CC, for my webinar study, whatever. And then I'm going to just, so I know. All right. And I hit OK. So that sample was created successfully as well. So now if I want to go to, or if I want to view that sample, I can hit view here, and it'll show me that sample. So it shows me that Q11 CC webinar was created. The description for that sample is Laura's demo for samples. There's a date, time date stamp on it. The owner is the person who created the sample, and the owner of the sample is the only one that can actually delete the sample. Other people can see it, but the owner is the only one that can actually delete the sample. There are 250 responses in this sample. 0 are coded, 0 are quality reviewed. The sample is made up from one study, 7 questions, and if I click that, it tells me the study and the 7 questions that the sample was created from. Gives me the code book, if there was already a code book, and then I randomly selected 22% of the responses to create this sample. That's the sample mode. This table is customizable. You can customize it to show. If you don't care who created it, you can turn that off. Or if you don't care when it was made, you can turn those things on or off and select what you'd like to select there. Okay. All right. So this is the sample for Q11. Now, notice that when I right-click on a sample, I've got a couple of options. I can see the properties of the sample, which gives me the ID and the description. I can delete the sample. I can navigate to Ascribe Coder for this particular sample. Okay, so that's how I would actually access those responses in the sample, and it's just going to Ascribe Coder. The only difference is at the bottom, my source tells me that, gives me a sample ID and a sample description, okay, and lists the questions that the sample actually came from. So my source, if I click sources up here, is actually a sample rather than a question. All right, let me go ahead and return some responses. And you'll notice that here it tells me that these responses came from a sample as well. So once I've returned responses, I see that these actually came from a sample. Okay? So we can access a sample. Let's just go back home for a second. I can navigate directly to supervisor samples. And on my samples page, I'll have a list of all the samples that I've created on this account. So these are all the samples that have been created on this particular account. Okay? I can access any of these samples that I'd like. All right. Again, I can see my sample mode, the sample owner. You know what? Maybe I only want to see my samples. And if I only want to see my samples, then I click My Samples and hit Enter. So there's just my samples. I can also filter, and the filter would be on the sample ID. So maybe I just want to see the samples for Q11. So I type that in. No, it's just taking a minute. And there's my samples for Q11. All right? And I can access a sample by right-clicking and hitting Ascribe Coder. And again, the sources down here tell me that this is from a sample, or if I search, I see that it's from a sample there. I click here, I see that it's a sample. All right, and I can actually, go over and decide that I want to bring things up from the question if I like. All right, so popping back over to home, going to Supervisor Studies, going into my webinar. I can also bring up a sample by going into a question. So I'm going to go into this question and go into Ascribe Coder and go to a sample that way. If this question is part of a sample, then it will be, the samples will be listed here. and hit OK. And now I'm bringing up the responses from that particular sample. All right? So I want to make sure we all kind of understand. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to talk about. And let's go into, so we've created samples from a question. We've created samples from a shared question from the questions page. We can also create samples. I'm going to use my exercises for this one. We can also create samples from Ascribe Coder. All right? So let's say for my exercise 6, I'm going to go into Ascribe Coder. And let's say that I was told to just code responses. And this is very interesting code book I have here. That's very, it's got me a little confused as to what my responses will be here. So let's just bring them all up real quick. But let's say I was told to just code the responses that said Dixie or solo. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and search for Dixie and solo and hit go. So I've got 166 responses, okay, that said Dixie or solo. I'm going to right-click and hit Create Sample. And I'm going to call this my E6. That is not a 6, but that is E6 Dixie solo. This is whatever, whoever's request. But I'm going to just put in Laura demo. Okay. So I just created a sample of just these 166 responses. Look at what this little pop-up asks me. It asks me if I wish to load the newly created sample, because right now I'm in the question. But do I want to instead go into the sample? If I hit yes, you'll notice that down here I'm in my actual sample now. Okay? And when I search, I've got 166 out of 166 showing over here. So now I could code just these guys and deliver them at my client's request. Now, more often, what we would do if we were creating a sample, you know, maybe you're supposed to filter through a certain, you know, I want just concept 1 and 2 coded, leave concept 3, 4, and 5 uncoded. So you can actually filter through a certain concept, bring them up, and create your sample that way. Okay? Today, samples can only be coded in Ascribe Coder. All right? They can't be coded with Phrase Analyzer, Review Responses, or the Single Response Coder interface. They're only accessible through Ascribe Coder today. And I think that's pretty much everything that has to do with samples today. Julie, was there anything else that you think that I've not covered? I covered the creation, how to access them, that it's only from Ascribe Coder. Is there anything else that you can think of that we might want to touch on, or any questions that might have come up while we were going through this?
No, that's pretty much it. If anybody has any questions, please just type them in the chat window, and we'll be glad to answer them.
Yeah. Also, if you have any suggestions as you're using these, you know, my first suggestion was that I wanted to be able to code them in Phrase Analyzer or look at them in Phrase Analyzer. Oh, and I didn't talk much about this, about quality checking. So throughout the years, we've been asked if we could do this a 25% sample so that people could quality check, or I'm only supposed to quality check 10%, and I want a random sample of that 10%, and I want it to stay the same. Well, that's what this is allowing us to do, to click on a coded question. So let's go back over here. Let's see, do I have any questions that are coded here? They're all, oh, my closed-ends are coded. Oh, that's okay. Let's see, but to click on a coded question, and go down to samples, create a quick sample, and say, you know what, I want to decode it only, and I want some percentage of that coded only that I'm going to check. Maybe this is, and then I could call this my, and I know this is a closed end, but imagine that it's an open end, Q7, Q8 quality check. Okay? And I can select that. And now that sample is mine to do, you know, to go through and quality check and make sure they're all correct. All right, that's why on the samples page, when we go to the samples page, we asked that it told us how many were quality reviewed, the percentage that was quality reviewed, so that we could use this as a way to quality check some random selection of verbatims. Because today, if you're supposed to quality check 10%, what you might do is do the math and just quality check that number, but you're not really getting a random, you know, a random sample of those. This way you are. You're getting a true random sample. One of the questions that I was asked is if more coded data comes in, you know, if somebody goes through and loads in another set of data and codes another 10%, would the sample be updated as well? And no, the sample, once the sample's created, it's not updated, and it's not editable. You can delete it, change the properties, but you can't change what's in the sample. Okay. All right. Any questions coming in, Julie, or do you guys have any questions?
There's a suggestion to add a column on the questions page to show whether a sample's been created.
Oh, do we have? Oh, I didn't even think about that. So supervisor studies. So the suggestion is to have that option. Samples created. All right, I like that suggestion. We'll make sure that we get that one in the box for the development team. And yeah, anything like that you know that would help everyone, you know, with using samples, that would be great to have any of that feedback. All right. Any other questions from anybody?
That's it right now.
All right. Well, that was a nice, short, and sweet. But that's what samples are. They're supposed to be very, very simple, very, very easy to create, easy to use. You know, we're looking forward to your feedback. You can send that to support@languagelogic.net. And you know, we'll be doing another session on samples this afternoon if you think any of your colleagues would benefit from it. With that, I suppose, any other questions that anybody would like to be addressed? We have another 15 minutes, and I'll give you a minute to type it up if you have any other questions. But